She said she was playing golf. She kissed me on the forehead, told me not to wait up for lunch, and walked out the door. It was a perfect lie, delivered with a perfect smile. But she made one fatal mistake. She left her phone on the kitchen counter. And when I saw the message that lit up that screen, I realized that the woman I had been sleeping next to for 10 years wasn't just cheating on me. She was planning to end me. My name is Harrison Caldwell. I am 72 years old. I spent 4 decades building a logistics empire in Seattle, moving cargo across oceans and continents. I have negotiated with union leaders, navigated hostile takeovers, and survived economic recessions. I thought I knew how to spot a liar. I thought I could smell a bad deal from a mile away. But the most dangerous deal of my life was being signed right under my nose inside my own home by the people I trusted to protect me. If you are listening to this and you have ever felt that gut instinct telling you something is wrong in your own family, do not ignore it. That is your survival instinct talking. If you are new here, subscribe to the channel because I am going to tell you exactly how I dismantled their trap piece by piece. But first, let me take you back to that rainy Tuesday morning when my life changed forever. It was 8 in the morning, and the gray Seattle sky was already weeping against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our estate on Lake Washington. The house was quiet, that heavy, expensive silence that you only find in homes that are too big for 2 people. My wife Beatrice came into the kitchen. She looked radiant. She was 48, 24 years younger than me, and she wore her youth like a weapon. She was dressed in a crisp white tennis skirt and a navy blue polo shirt, her hair pulled back in a flawless ponytail. She smelled of lavender and expensive ambition. "Harrison, darling," she said, pouring me a glass of orange juice. "Don't forget your vitamins. The charity tournament starts at 9, so I have to run." I looked at her from behind my newspaper. She seemed so innocent, so devoted. I took the glass from her hand. "Thank you, Bea," I said. "You look beautiful today. Go win a trophy for us." She leaned down and pressed her lips to my forehead. It was a cold kiss. Quick, perfunctory, like checking a box on a manifest. "See you this afternoon," she whispered. Then she grabbed her car keys, her heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor as she headed for the garage. I heard the heavy thud of the garage door closing, then the roar of her Mercedes engine fading down the driveway. I was alone, or so I thought. I sat there for a moment staring at the rain streaking the glass. I felt tired. Lately I always felt tired. My doctor, a man Beatrice had recommended, told me it was just part of aging. He called it cognitive decline. He said I needed rest and medication. But deep down in the part of my brain that had built a fortune from nothing, a siren was wailing. I stood up to take my plate to the sink. That is when I saw it. Beatrice's phone. It was sitting on the marble island, half hidden behind a vase of fresh lilies. She never went anywhere without it. It was practically glued to her hand. I reached out to grab it, thinking I should call the gate security to stop her before she reached the main road. But before I could touch it, the screen lit up. It vibrated against the stone counter, a harsh buzzing sound that echoed in the empty kitchen. A notification popped up. It was a text message. The sender was saved simply as the letter A. The message was short, just 6 words. But those 6 words stopped my heart cold. Did the old man take his pill? I froze. My hand hovered over the device. The old man. Not Harrison. Not your husband. The old man. And the question wasn't about my day or my comfort. It was about the pill. The blue pill she insisted I take every morning for my memory. I picked up the phone. My fingers were trembling, not from age, but from a sudden, icy rage. I swiped up to unlock it. I knew her passcode. It had been our wedding anniversary, November 4th, for the last 10 years. I typed in the numbers. 1, 1, 0, 4. The screen shook. Incorrect passcode. I frowned. Maybe I mistyped. I tried again, slower this time. 1104. Incorrect passcode. Try again in 1 minute. My breath caught in my throat. She had changed it. Recently. Why would a wife hide her phone content from her husband of a decade, unless there was something on there that could destroy her? I put the phone down. I didn't run after her. I didn't scream. I did what I have always done when faced with a crisis in business. I became cold. I became analytical. I needed data. I looked at the message on the lock screen again. Did the old man take his pill? I looked at the orange juice glass on the table. The blue pill was sitting there on a napkin, dissolved slightly by a drop of condensation. I picked it up. I didn't swallow it. I walked to the pantry and wrapped it in a paper towel, then shoved it deep into my pocket. She said she was playing golf. That was her alibi. A charity tournament. That meant she would be outdoors for at least 4 hours. I walked to the mudroom that connected the kitchen to the garage. This was where we kept our sporting gear. My eyes scanned the racks. My clubs were there. Her spare bag was there. But then I looked down at the shoe rack. Beatrice had 2 pairs of golf shoes. One was a white pair she used for sunny days. The other was a waterproof black pair for the wet Seattle weather. I looked at the floor. The black waterproof shoes were sitting right there on the shelf. They were bone dry. Not a speck of mud. Not a blade of grass. I looked outside. The rain was coming down in sheets. It had been raining all night. The golf course would be a swamp. No one in their right mind would play in sneakers or heels today. You needed spikes. You needed waterproofing. And yet her waterproof shoes were here. I walked over to the storage closet and opened it. Her primary golf bag, the white leather one she loved to show off, was gone. That seemed to support her story. But I stepped closer. I knelt down and looked at the floor where her bag usually sat. There was a small circle of dust. If she had taken her bag this morning, the dust would be disturbed, but the outline was perfect. And then I realized something else. I looked up at the high shelf. Her rain cover for the golf bag was still folded neatly in its plastic case. I stood up and a dark laugh bubbled up in my chest. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of a man realizing he had been played. She wasn't playing golf. You cannot play 18 holes in Seattle in October without rain gear and without waterproof shoes. She had taken the bag to make it look real, but she had forgotten the details. She was sloppy. Or maybe she just thought I was too old and too stupid to notice. She wasn't at the country club. She was somewhere else. And she was with someone who called me the old man. I walked back into the kitchen and looked at that locked phone. It buzzed again. Another message from A on "Don't worry, the notary is ready for tonight. He won't know what he is signing." The notary signing. The air left the room. This wasn't just an affair. An affair breaks your heart. This was financial. This was legal. They were planning to make me sign something. Tonight. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I saw gray hair. I saw wrinkles. I saw a man who walked with a cane. But behind those eyes, the shark that had eaten competitors alive in the 80s was waking up. They thought I was a senile old man who took his pills and watched TV. They thought I was a liability to be liquidated. I picked up my cane. I tapped it once on the floor, a solid, sharp sound. Beatrice would be back in 4 hours. She would expect to find me groggy, confused, and medicated. She would expect the old man. Instead, she was going to find the CEO. I didn't have her password, but I didn't need it. I knew something she didn't. I knew that the house security system, the one she claimed was broken 3 weeks ago, was actually running on a localized backup server in the basement, a server only I had the key to. If she wasn't at the golf course, the exterior cameras would show me exactly which direction she turned when she left the driveway. And if I was lucky, the interior microphones might have picked up a conversation before she left. I turned away from the window and headed toward the basement stairs. The game had started, Beatrice. You played your opening move. Now watch me play mine. The sound of the garage door opening felt like the rumble of an approaching storm. I sat in my leather armchair by the fireplace, a book open on my lap, though I had not read a single word for the last hour. I was waiting. I was composing my face into the mask of the man she expected to see, the tired, slightly confused, harmless old husband. When Beatrice walked into the living room, she brought the cold air with her. She was flushed, her cheeks pink, her eyes bright with a kind of manic energy that she tried to disguise as athletic exhaustion. She carried her golf bag, but she set it down near the door with a carelessness that no true golfer would ever show toward their clubs. "Harrison, you are still in your robe," she said, her voice pitching up into that sweet, condescending tone she used lately. "Did you have a nap?" I looked up slowly, blinking as if adjusting to the light. "Just resting my eyes." "B, how was the game?" She walked over to me. She leaned down to kiss my cheek, and that was when the second wave of nausea hit me. It wasn't the smell of rain. It wasn't the smell of wet grass or earth. It was a sharp, musky scent, sandalwood and tobacco. It was a man's cologne, expensive, aggressive, and clinging to the fabric of her polo shirt, like a second skin. It was so strong I had to hold my breath to keep from recoiling. She didn't smell like the outdoors. She smelled like a hotel room. Brutal, she sighed, straightening up and smoothing her hair. The wind on the back nine was impossible. I think I lost 3 balls in the water hazard on the 12th hole alone, but I managed to finish with an 82. Not my best, but considering the weather, I will take it. An 82. It was a respectable score. It was also a specific, detailed lie. She was getting comfortable. She walked to the sideboard where she kept my medication organizer. This was the ritual, the daily humiliation. She popped open the Tuesday compartment and shook out a single pill. It was oblong and bright blue. She called it my memory supplement. I knew it as the chemical anchor that had been dragging my mind into the deep ocean for months. Every time I took it, I lost 4 hours. My tongue would feel heavy, my thoughts would turn into sludge, and I would become docile. Perfect for signing papers you shouldn't sign. Perfect for a husband you wanted to control. "Here we go, sweetie," she said, walking back with the pill and a glass of water. "Dr. Aris said it is crucial you take this at the same time every day to keep those neurons firing. Open up." I looked at the blue pill in her perfectly manicured palm. I looked at her eyes. There was no warmth there, only a cold calculation. She was watching me closely, her pupils dilated. She needed me sedated before the notary arrived tonight. I took the pill with a trembling hand playing my part. I put it in my mouth. Beatrice stood there, hovering, watching my throat. She wasn't going to walk away until she saw me swallow. I took a sip of water. As I tilted my head back, I slid the pill deftly underneath my tongue, pressing it hard against the floor of my mouth. I gulped the water loudly. "Good boy," she said, patting my shoulder. Suddenly I bent forward, forcing a coughing fit. I hacked and wheezed, covering my mouth with my handkerchief. It was a performance worthy of an award. My shoulders shook, my face went red. "Wrong pipe!" I gasped, wiping my mouth with the white cloth. "Careful, Harrison," she said, her voice lacking any real concern. "Breathe." While I coughed, I felt the pill slide from under my tongue and into the folds of the handkerchief. I balled the cloth up in my fist and shoved it into my robe pocket. "I am fine," I wheezed. "Just a little dry." She looked at me for a second longer, searching for any sign of deception. But I just looked back with watery old eyes. She seemed satisfied. "I am going to hop in the shower," she said, glancing at her watch. "I feel gross. All that mud. We have guests coming at 6 for your little birthday surprise, remember? Try to be dressed by 5. And wear the gray suit, the one I laid out." She turned and headed for the stairs. I listened to her footsteps fade. I listened for the sound of the master bedroom door closing. Then the faint hiss of the shower starting. The moment the water started running, the old man vanished. I sat up straight. The tremors in my hands stopped. I pulled the handkerchief from my pocket, plucked out the dissolving blue pill, and dropped it into the potted fern next to my chair. That plant had been dying for weeks. Now I knew why. I reached for the landline phone on the side table. I didn't use my cell phone. I knew she monitored the bill. But the landline was old school. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It was the direct line to the pro shop at the Lake Washington Golf Club. The phone rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice picked up. Lake Washington Golf Club, Jimmy speaking. Jimmy was the club manager. I had helped his son get a scholarship 5 years ago. He was a good man. Jimmy, it is Harrison Caldwell, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. Mr. Caldwell. It is good to hear from you, sir. We haven't seen you on the greens in months. How are you holding up? I am hanging in there, Jimmy. Listen. I have a quick question. My wife, Beatrice, she came home raving about the condition of the course today. She said the wind on the 12th hole was a nightmare. I just wanted to settle a bet. How were the greens rolling today? There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence. Mr. Caldwell. Jimmy said, his voice confused. Beatrice couldn't have played today. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice light. Oh, why is that? Well, she said she shot an 82. That is impossible, sir. We have been closed since yesterday morning. The heavy rains flooded the back nine. The entire course is under 3 inches of water. The gates are locked. Nobody has set foot on the grass all day, not even the groundskeepers. I closed my eyes. The confirmation hit me harder than the suspicion. It was one thing to guess, another to know. An 82 on a closed, flooded course. Are you sure, Jimmy? I asked, just to be certain. Positive, sir. I am sitting in the shop right now looking at the security monitors. The only thing out there is ducks. Is everything all right? Everything is fine, Jimmy, I said, my voice turning to steel. Just a misunderstanding. Beatrice must have been talking about a simulator game. Thanks for the information. I hung up the phone gently. I sat there in the silence of my living room. Upstairs, the water was still running. Beatrice was washing off the scent of another chum, believing she had successfully drugged her husband into submission. She thought the game was over. She thought she had won. But she had made a critical error. She assumed I was already gone. She didn't realize that by trying to bury me, she had just handed me the shovel. She wasn't playing golf. The course was closed. The notary was coming. The pill was in the plant. And I was wide awake. I looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. It was 2 in the afternoon. I had 4 hours before the guests arrived. 4 hours before they tried to steal my life. I stood up, gripping my cane. Not for support this time, but as a weapon. I needed to get into the safe in my study before Leo arrived. I needed to see exactly what they were planning to make me sign. And I needed to know why my son, my own flesh and blood, had decided to sell his father for a payout. I walked toward the stairs, moving silently across the carpet. The hunt was on. The library was my sanctuary. It was a room lined with mahogany shelves filled with books I had actually read, and deals I had closed over glasses of scotch. It was the place where I felt most like myself, the captain of my own ship. But as I walked in and closed the heavy double doors behind me, the room felt different. It felt like a cage. I sat down at my desk, the massive oak surface that had been my command center for 30 years. I didn't have much time. Beatrice was in the shower scrubbing away the evidence of her infidelity. I had maybe 15 minutes before she came downstairs to check on her patient. I needed to move money. I needed to hire Frank, the only private investigator I trusted, and Frank did not work on credit. He needed a retainer, and he needed it today. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark room. I navigated to my primary banking portal. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in my username and the complex password I kept memorized. I hit enter, expecting to see the comforting rows of numbers, the millions I had stockpiled for a rainy day. Instead, the screen flashed red. A single box popped up in the center of the monitor. Access denied. Account frozen. Please contact your administrator. I stared at the screen. I blinked, thinking perhaps my eyes were playing tricks on me. I tried again. Same result. Access denied. I felt a cold sweat prickle on the back of my neck. I was the administrator. This was my money. I had earned every cent of it while others were sleeping or partying. I picked up the phone on my desk and dialed the private client line for the bank. I didn't get the automated system. I got a human immediately. That was one of the perks of being me. Or at least it used to be. Pacific Trust, this is Sarah. How can I help you today, Sarah? I said, keeping my voice level, fighting the rising panic. This is Harrison Caldwell. I am trying to access my operating account, but I am getting a freeze notification. Fix it, please. There was a pause, the kind of pause that tells you bad news is coming. I heard the clicking of a keyboard on the other end. Mr. Caldwell, Sarah, said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming professional but distant. I see the flag on the account here. I am afraid I cannot unlock it for you. What do you mean you cannot unlock it? I snapped, the CEO coming out. It is my account. Not anymore, sir, she said gently. As of 9 a.m. this morning, we received a court order regarding a temporary conservatorship. All assets under your name have been frozen pending a medical review. Control of the accounts has been transferred to the court-appointed guardian. Guardian. I whispered the word like it was a curse. Who is the guardian? I heard her hesitate. She didn't want to tell me. She probably thought she was talking to a senile old man who would forget this conversation in 10 minutes. Mr. Leo Caldwell, she said softly. Your son. He submitted the paperwork along with a physician's statement certifying incapacity due to dementia level 2. The phone slipped slightly in my hand. Dementia level 2. That was the diagnosis. Moderate decline. The stage where you can no longer manage your own finances or make legal decisions. It was a lie. A meticulously crafted, legally binding lie. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I sat there, the silence of the room pressing in on me. Leo. My son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike on this very driveway. The young man I had sent to the best boarding schools in New England. The adult who had never held a job for more than 6 months without quitting because the boss was too mean. My mind flashed back to a month ago. Leo had come to me in this very office. He looked terrible, his eyes bloodshot, his hands shaking. He needed $200,000. He said it was for a business investment, a tech startup, but I knew the look in his eyes. It was the look of a gambler who was in deep with the wrong people. I had told him no. I told him it was time to grow up. I told him I would not finance his self-destruction anymore. He had stood up, his face purple with rage. You owe me this, he had screamed. You sit on this pile of gold like a dragon while I suffer. You are a selfish old man and you are going to regret this. I thought it was just a tantrum. I didn't know it was a declaration of war. He didn't just want the money. He wanted to punish me for saying no. He had teamed up with Beatrice, the wife who wanted my life and the son who wanted my wallet. They were the perfect team. She provided the medical access and he provided the blood relation required for the conservatorship. A sound from the driveway pulled me from my thoughts. The crunch of tires on gravel. I stood up and walked to the window, peering through the slats of the blinds. A black Range Rover pulled up to the front entrance. It was Leo. He stepped out of the car, wearing a suit, that cost more than my first house, but he wore it sloppily. The tie loosened, the jacket unbuttoned. He looked around, checking the windows. He didn't look like a son coming to visit his ailing father. He looked like a vulture circling a carcass. I watched him. I expected him to come to the front door to ring the bell to play the part of the concerned visitor. But he didn't. He walked past the front entrance. He walked around the side of the house toward the terrace door that led directly to the master bedroom suite. Beatrice's territory. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass. My heart was pounding not with fear, but with a sorrow so deep it felt like drowning. He wasn't here to see me. He was here to celebrate with her. They were going to toast to their victory before the guests arrived. They were going to laugh about the old man and his frozen bank accounts. I looked down at my hands. They were wrinkled, yes, but they were steady. Leo had made a mistake. He thought that by taking my money, he had taken my power. He forgot that I made that money. I didn't inherit it. I built it. And you can freeze a bank account, but you cannot freeze a man's will. He walked into the house to meet his accomplice. He walked right past the library window, never once looking up to see if his father was watching. That was his second mistake. I turned away from the window. The bank wouldn't give me money. Fine. I didn't become a tycoon by relying on banks when the chips were down. I walked over to the bookshelf to the set of encyclopedias that hadn't been touched in 20 years. I pulled out volume M. Behind it was a small hidden wall safe. It wasn't digital. It was mechanical, old-fashioned, unhackable. I spun the dial. Click, click, click. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside, stacked in neat rows, was $50,000 in cash and a stack of gold coins I had bought during the last recession. I grabbed the cash. I stuffed it into the inside pockets of my blazer. You want to play games, Leo? You want to declare me incompetent? Let's see how incompetent I am when I buy the loyalty of the people you treat like dirt. I closed the safe. I had my war chest. Now I needed to get the evidence. I needed to know exactly what they were saying in that bedroom upstairs. I needed to record the conspiracy from the mouths of the conspirators themselves. I checked my watch. Beatrice was still upstairs. Leo was with her. They were distracted. It was time to go on the offensive. The door to the library swung open with a force that rattled the frames of the paintings on the walls. It was Leo. He didn't knock. He didn't ask permission. He walked in with the entitlement of a man who believed he already owned everything he saw. Behind him stood Beatrice, her face composed into a mask of worried concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had changed into a softer dress, something modest and maternal perfect for the role she was playing. Dad, Leo said, his voice loud and impatient. We have an appointment. Dr. Aris squeezed us in for an emergency evaluation before the party. I looked at them from behind my desk. I could feel the weight of the cash and gold coins pressing against my ribs inside my jacket pocket. It was a heavy, reassuring secret. I slowly closed the book I was pretending to read. An appointment, I asked, keeping my voice thin and wavering. I thought we were having cake. We are, sweetie, Beatrice said, stepping forward to take my arm. Her grip was firm, almost painful. But Dr. Aris is worried about your episode this morning. You know, when you forgot where I was. We just want to make sure you are up for the festivities tonight. I let them lead me out of the house. I shuffled my feet, leaning heavily on my cane. Inside, my heart was racing with the adrenaline of a soldier going behind enemy lines. This wasn't a medical checkup. This was a deposition. They needed a fresh piece of paper, a documented incident of confusion, to solidify the conservatorship they had rushed through the court system that morning. The ride to the clinic was silent. Leo drove the Range Rover too fast, weaving through the wet Seattle traffic with aggressive jerks of the steering wheel. I sat in the back, staring out at the gray skyline. I saw the cranes at the port, the steel containers stacked like colorful bricks. I had built that. I had managed logistics for thousands of employees, and now I was being transported like a piece of damaged cargo. Dr. Aris's clinic was in a sleek, modern building downtown. It didn't smell like a hospital. It smelled like money. The waiting room was filled with abstract art and leather chairs. There were no other patients. This was a concierge service for the wealthy, where diagnoses could be bought and sold like stocks. Dr. Aris was waiting for us in his office. He was a younger man, smooth-skinned and handsome, in a way that made you check your wallet. He wore a white coat that was tailored to fit his gym-honed physique. When we walked in, he didn't smile. He looked grave. "Harrison." "Please take a seat," Aris said, gesturing to a chair placed in the center of the room. I sat down. I noticed immediately that the chair was lower than the others. It forced me to look up at him, at Leo, and at Beatrice. It was a classic power dynamic trick. I also noticed the small red light blinking on the bookshelf behind his desk. A camera. They were recording this. So Harrison Aris began leaning back in his chair and clicking a pen. "Beatrice tells me you were quite agitated this morning. Can you tell me what year it is?" I looked at him. I blinked slowly. "It is 19... No, it is 2000 and..." I let my voice trail off. I saw Leo smirk. Harrison Aris pressed his voice, sharpening. "Do you know who the president is?" I looked around the room, feigning distress. I looked at the camera lens, then quickly away. "Why are you asking me these questions? I just want to go home." "You are confused, Harrison. That is why we are here. Now tell me, why did you threaten Beatrice this morning? Why did you accuse her of stealing from you?" The question was a trap. A blatant, dangerous trap. If I denied it angrily, if I shouted that she was a liar and a cheat, the camera would record an angry, paranoid old man lashing out at his loving wife. It would fit perfectly with the symptoms of dementia, paranoia. If I stayed silent, I would look catatonic, unable to process reality. I felt the anger rising in my chest, a hot tide that wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to tell him that I knew about the golf course. I knew about the bank accounts. But I swallowed the rage. I forced it down until it was just a cold knot in my stomach. I had to be smarter. I had to give them exactly what they wanted, but in a way that made them careless. I turned my head slowly toward Leo. I widened my eyes, letting my jaw go slack. I reached out a trembling hand toward my son, Barnaby, I whispered. The room went silent. Barnaby was the name of our golden retriever who had died 15 years ago. Leo recoiled, a look of pure disgust crossing his face. "Jesus, Dad. I am not the dog. Barnaby." "Come here, boy," I said, adding a whistle, a pathetic, wavering sound. "Where is your ball? Did you lose your ball in the garden?" I saw Beatrice cover her mouth with her hand. She wasn't hiding a gasp of sadness. She was hiding a smile. This was better than they had hoped for. This wasn't just confusion. This was a complete break from reality. Dr. Aris didn't even bother to ask another question. He shook his head theatrically for the benefit of the camera and began writing furiously on his notepad. "The decline is much more rapid than we anticipated," Aris said, his voice dropping to a somber whisper. "He is disoriented. He is hallucinating. I am afraid he is a danger to himself. I am going to recommend immediate full-time supervision. The conservatorship needs to be permanent." Leo let out a long breath, his shoulders relaxing. "It is so hard to see him like this, Doc. But we just want what is best for him." I sat there continuing to mutter the dog's name, playing the fool, while my mind was recording every word they said. They were signing my life away, and they were doing it with the signature of a doctor who was sleeping with my wife. Aris stood up and walked around the desk to hand the paperwork to Leo. As he leaned over, his sleeve pulled back. That was when I saw it. It was a flash of gold and deep blue, a wristwatch, but not just any watch. It was a vintage Rolex Submariner, the gold edition with the blue bezel. It was a heavy, ostentatious piece. I knew every scratch on the band. I knew the weight of it. I knew the inscription on the back that read, "To Harrison for building the world." It was the watch I had worn for 30 years, the watch that had vanished from my nightstand a month ago. Beatrice had told me I must have misplaced it, that I probably threw it in the trash in a fit of confusion. But there it was, on the wrist of the man declaring me incompetent. Beatrice hadn't just cheated on me with him. She was paying him with my own possessions. She had stolen my legacy and wrapped it around the wrist of her lover. A cold clarity washed over me. The last shred of doubt, the last tiny piece of my heart, that wondered if maybe I was being too harsh, disintegrated. This wasn't family. These were scavengers picking the meat off a living lion. Dr. Aris caught me staring at his wrist. He quickly pulled his sleeve down, a flicker of panic in his eyes. But it was too late. I had seen it. "Good boy, Barnaby," I whispered one last time, looking straight at Leo, but my mind was locking onto the image of that watch. They thought they had won. They had the diagnosis. They had the paperwork. They had the old man calling for his dead dog. "Let's go home," Beatrice said, sounding triumphant. "We have a party to get to." Yes, I thought, as I struggled to stand up, gripping my cane until my knuckles turned white. "Let's go to the party. I have a surprise for you too, and it is going to be much louder than a barking dog." The drive back from the clinic was quiet, but the air inside the car was thick with unspoken victories. Leo tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, humming along to the radio, while Beatrice checked her makeup in the visor mirror. They were in high spirits. They had their diagnosis. They had the footage of me calling for a dead dog. In their minds, the hard part was over. Now all they had to do was wait for the ink to dry on the court order and for nature, or something that looked like nature, to take its course. When we pulled into the driveway, the rain had stopped, leaving the world gray and dripping. Beatrice helped me out of the car, her grip firm, playing the role of the dutiful nurse for the benefit of the gardener who was trimming the hedges. "You should rest before the guests arrive, Harrison," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I am going to jump in the shower and get ready. I want to look perfect for your big night." I nodded, leaning heavily on my cane, shuffling toward the stairs. "I will just lie down for a bit," I mumbled. I watched her ascend the staircase, her hips swaying, her confidence absolute. She didn't look back. Why would she? She thought she had left a broken man in the hallway. She didn't know she had left a saboteur. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of the master bedroom door closing. Then I waited for the sound of the water running. The plumbing in this old house was excellent, but sound carried through the vents. A moment later, the hiss of the shower began. The mask dropped instantly. I straightened my spine. The shuffle in my step vanished. I didn't go to my room. I turned and walked silently toward the west wing of the house, to the room Beatrice used as her home office. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. She was arrogant. She believed I couldn't even remember the president's name, so why would she worry about me accessing her computer? I stepped inside. The room smelled of her perfume and the stale scent of secrets. Her laptop was sitting on the sleek glass desk, asleep, but powered on. I didn't try to guess her password. I didn't need to get inside the machine right now. I needed to get inside her head. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black USB drive. It looked like a standard memory stick, something you might use to store photos, but it was a hardware keylogger. I had bought a dozen of them 5 years ago when I was auditing the security protocols for my logistics fleet. Back then, I used them to catch dispatchers who were selling routes to competitors. I had built a tracking system that monitored 5,000 trucks across 3 time zones. I knew how to find a needle in a haystack. And today, I was tracking something much more volatile than cargo. I reached behind her sleek monitor and found the USB port on the back of her docking station. I plugged the device in. It was small, discreet, and black on black. Unless she physically turned the machine around and inspected the ports with a flashlight, she would never see it. The device blinked once, a tiny red LED that signaled it was active. From this moment on, every single keystroke she made, every email she typed, every password she entered would be recorded and saved to the drive's internal memory. It would also transmit the data in real time to a paired receiver if the range was short enough. And the range was short enough. I turned to leave, but I paused. On her desk next to her mouse pad was a notepad. I glanced at the top page. It was a list of numbers, calculations. I recognized the handwriting. It was Leo's. He was doing math. But he wasn't adding up assets. He was subtracting debts. The numbers were large, sloppy, and desperate. Suddenly, the sound of the water in the pipes stopped. The shower was over. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded my system. I had maybe 60 seconds before she walked out of the bathroom. If she found me in here, the game was up. She would know I was lucid. She would know I was plotting. I moved fast, faster than I had moved in years. I slipped out of the office, pulling the door shut until it clicked softly. I didn't run, but I walked with a long, purposeful stride toward my own bedroom at the end of the hall. I made it to my door just as I heard the handle of the master bedroom turn. I slipped inside my room and leaned against the wood, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Harrison Beatrice's voice called out from down the hall. "Are you awake?" I waited a beat, catching my breath. Then I opened the door a crack, rubbing my eyes. "I am up, B," I called back, my voice thick with fake sleep. "Just looking for my other shoe." She was standing at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a towel, her hair wet. She smiled, but her eyes scanned me, checking for anything out of place. "Okay, hurry up. The caterers are here." I closed the door and locked it. I walked to the corner of my room where a heavy Persian rug covered the hardwood floor. I rolled the corner back. There, one of the floorboards was loose. I had loosened it myself 3 months ago to hide a bottle of scotch I didn't want the doctor to see. Now it hid something far more potent. I pried the board up. Underneath, nestled in the insulation, was a small rugged laptop. It was an old field unit from my company, battered but reliable. I pulled it out and set it on the floor. I booted it up. It hummed to life. I opened the custom software I had installed, the receiver program for the keylogger. Searching for signal. The text blinked on the screen. I held my breath. The walls in this house were thick. Signal found. Device active. I let out a long exhale. We were live. I watched the screen. Nothing was happening yet. She was still getting dressed. I sat there in the semi-darkness of my room, the glow of the screen illuminating my face, waiting for the first transmission. 10 minutes passed. Then the text began to scroll. She was typing. "Log in Beatrice. See password. Blue Ocean 1980. She was into her email. I watched the letters appear on my screen as she typed them in real time in her office down the hall. It was a ghostly feeling, like reading her thoughts before she even finished thinking them. Subject, tonight. Recipient, leo.caldwell@gmail.com. The message body began to form. Don't be late. Make sure the notary has the amended page. Aris is nervous about the video, but I told him Harrison is too gone to do anything with it. We are close, baby. Just get through tonight. I clenched my jaw. She was coordinating the final strike. She switched windows. A new email. This one was to a corporate address. Subject, policy number 99,820-B activation. My stomach tightened. Policy. Insurance. I watched the words appear character by character. To claim, agent at pacificlife.com. Dear Mr. Henderson, per our phone conversation, I am confirming the details of the accelerated benefit clause. My husband's condition has deteriorated rapidly. We expect to transition him to full-time care soon. Regarding the accidental death rider we discussed." She paused, typing. I could imagine her sipping water, maybe smiling at the screen. Then she continued. "Does the double indemnity clause apply if the accident occurs within the home residence? Please confirm that the $5 million payout is active as of midnight tomorrow. We are worried about the stairs. He has been very unsteady." I stared at the screen. The letters blurred for a second as rage and horror collided in my brain. $5 million. And the condition? An accident. Specifically, the stairs. The loose carpet I had noticed earlier on the staircase wasn't just poor maintenance. It was a trap. They weren't planning to put me in a home. That was just the cover story for the bank. They were planning to kill me. Midnight tomorrow. That was the deadline. That was when the policy became fully active for the payout they wanted. They needed me to sign the conservatorship tonight, so Leo could control the legal narrative. Then tomorrow night, after the waiting period ended, Harrison Caldwell would have a tragic fall down the grand staircase. The grieving widow and the devastated son would collect the insurance money and the estate, claiming they did everything they could to save the poor, demented old man. I sat back against the wall, the cold air from the floorboard space seeping into my bones. This was not a theft. This was an execution. I looked at the time. It was 5:30. The guests would be arriving in 30 minutes. The notary would be here. Leo would be here. Aris would be here. I closed the laptop and shoved it back into the hole, replacing the board and the rug. I stood up. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself. I adjusted my tie. I smoothed my gray hair. They wanted an accident, I would give them a collision. But I wouldn't be the one falling. I unlocked my door and stepped out into the hallway. I could hear music playing downstairs. The party was starting. And I was ready to be the life of it. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of my bedroom, casting long, pale shadows across the floor. I had not slept. How could I sleep knowing that the people under my roof were calculating the exact monetary value of my death? I lay in bed for an hour after sunrise, listening to the sounds of the house waking up. I heard the distant clatter of pans in the kitchen. I heard heavy footsteps pacing in the hallway. It was the sound of anticipation. They were waiting for the finale. I finally threw off the covers and swung my legs out of bed. My joints were stiff, a reminder of the 72 years I had carried this body through the world, but my mind was razor sharp. I dressed slowly, choosing my clothes with the deliberation of a man putting on armor. A thick wool cardigan, sturdy trousers, and my loafers with the non-slip rubber soles. I would need traction today. I opened my bedroom door and stepped out into the hallway. The house was silent again. The air smelled of lemon polish and coffee, a domestic facade covering a rot that went down to the foundation. I walked toward the grand staircase. It was a masterpiece of architecture, a sweeping curve of polished oak that cascaded down into the foyer like a waterfall of wood. Beatrice loved this staircase. She said it was dramatic. Today, I realized exactly how dramatic she intended it to be. I paused at the top, landing my hand hovering over the mahogany banister. From this vantage point, I could see down into the open-plan living area and the edge of the kitchen. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel eyes on me. I looked down at the steps. A long, intricate runner carpet flowed down the center of the stairs, usually held in place by brass rods at the base of each riser. It was meant to provide grip to make the descent safer. But as I looked closer, squinting against the morning light, I noticed something wrong. The runner looked swollen. It wasn't sitting flush against the wood. It was floating just a fraction of an inch, as if the brass rods had been removed or loosened. And at the very edge of the third step, where the wood met the fabric, there was a faint, glistening sheen. It caught the light for just a second, like a wet lip. My heart hammered a warning rhythm against my ribs. The email from last night flashed in my mind. The accident rider. The stairs. I looked around. No one was watching. Or at least no one was showing themselves. I leaned my weight on my cane and slipped my right foot out of my loafer. I held the shoe in my hand. It was a solid shoe, heavy leather. I tossed it. I threw it gently onto the middle of the third step, right onto the carpet runner. Normally, the shoe would have landed with a thud and stayed there. Friction would have held it. Instead, the moment the leather sole touched the carpet, the fabric shifted. It didn't just move, it slid. The runner shot forward as if it were on ice. The shoe, carried by the momentum, skidded wildly, spinning down 4, 5, 6 steps, picking up speed until it launched off the curve and crashed loudly into the grandfather clock in the foyer below. The sound was explosive in the quiet house. Crack. Thud. The carpet settled back into place, but now I saw it clearly. The wood underneath was coated in something thick and viscous. Industrial lubricant. Or maybe cooking oil. It didn't matter what it was. It was a death trap. If I had stepped on that with my full weight, my feet would have flown out from under me instantly. I would have tumbled backward, my skull cracking against the hardwood edges, my neck snapping like a dry twig. I stood there staring at the oil-slicked wood, feeling a cold horror wash over me. This wasn't just greed. This was hatred. You don't do this to a human being you simply want to rob. You do this to something you want to erase. Then I heard it. A noise from the kitchen. It wasn't a gasp of shock. It wasn't the sound of running feet coming to help. It was silence, followed by a slow, hesitant shuffle. I quickly put my other shoe back on and gripped the banister with both hands. I stepped off the carpet, moving to the extreme edge of the stairs, where the wood was bare and dry. I clung to the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. I began to descend one agonizingly slow step at a time, bypassing the oiled center completely. As I reached the halfway point, Leo appeared in the archway of the kitchen. He was holding a spatula. He was wearing a casual sweater, looking like the picture of a relaxed son making breakfast. But his face gave him away. He was pale. His eyes were wide, darting from me to the bottom of the stairs, where my shoe lay next to the clock. He looked up at me. For a split second, I saw the disappointment. It was naked and ugly. He had heard the crash. He had expected to see his father's broken body crumpled at the bottom of the stairs. He had expected to be dialing 911 right now, putting on his best grieving voice. Instead, he saw me standing upright, gripping the rail, staring down at him, like a judge from a high bench. He blinked, composing himself quickly. "Dad." He called out, his voice cracking slightly. I heard a noise. "Are you okay?" I didn't answer immediately. I took another step, then another. I moved with deliberate, terrifying slowness. I watched him watch me. I saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed. I made it to the bottom landing. I walked over to the grandfather clock and picked up my shoe. I slipped it back on my foot, stamping the heel down firmly. Then I turned to face him. "I dropped a shoe," I said. My voice was low, gravelly, stripped of any warmth. Leo forced a laugh. It sounded like dry leaves rustling. "You scared me, Dad. I thought you fell. You really need to be more careful. These stairs are treacherous for someone your age. Maybe we should move your bedroom downstairs." He was still trying. He was still pushing the narrative. "The stairs are dangerous. The old man is clumsy." I walked up to him. I was 2 inches shorter than him now, age having compressed my spine, but in that moment, I felt 10 feet tall. I looked him dead in the eye. I looked past the weak chin and the expensive haircut right into the dark, greedy void where his soul should have been. "I am very careful, Leo," I said softly. "I watch every step I take, especially in this house." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable under my gaze. He tried to look away toward the kitchen. Well, breakfast is almost ready. I made eggs. I stepped closer, invading his personal space. The smell of the oil on the stairs was still in my nose, mixing with the smell of his fear. I saw the carpet, Leo, I whispered. His head snapped back to look at me. His eyes widened. I saw how loose it was. I continued, my voice steady as a heartbeat. It is slippery. Almost like someone spilled something. You should have the maid check that. We wouldn't want anyone to have a nasty accident before the party, would we? Leo couldn't speak. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The blood drained from his face. He realized I knew. He didn't know how much I knew, but he knew that I had seen the trap and walked around it. I patted him on the cheek. It was a patronizing, heavy pat. 2 sharp slaps. Don't look so sad, son, I said, leaning in close. I am old. I move slow, but I haven't fallen yet. So don't start celebrating. I pushed past him, heading toward the kitchen to pour my own coffee. I didn't look back, but I could feel the heat of his gaze burning into my back. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. The hatred of a predator who has missed his strike and knows the prey has teeth. I entered the kitchen and saw the pan of eggs on the stove. The burner was off. The eggs were cold and congealed. He hadn't been cooking. He had just been standing there waiting for the sound of my bones breaking. I poured a cup of black coffee. My hand didn't shake. I took a sip. It was bitter, but it tasted like life. I was alive. I had survived the morning. Now I had to survive the night. I checked the wall clock. 10 hours until the party. 10 hours to turn their trap into their tomb. I needed to get outside. I needed to meet Frank. The game had moved from defense to offense. They tried to kill me physically. I was about to kill them legally, financially, and socially. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. The air inside the house had become poisonous. Every time I inhaled, I felt the weight of their eyes on me. Leo was in the kitchen pretending to read a magazine, but watching the hallway reflection in the oven glass. Beatrice was upstairs, likely finalizing her outfit for the performance of her life. I needed to get out. I needed air that hadn't been recycled through a ventilation system of lies. But more importantly, I needed to make contact. I put on my heavy tweed coat and grabbed my cane. I walked to the kitchen door that led to the back garden. Leo looked up immediately, his body tense, ready to intercept. "Where are you going, Dad?" he asked, his voice tight. "Fresh air." I grunted, not stopping. The roses need deadheading. The gardener never does it right. I saw him hesitate. He weighed the options. If he stopped me, I might make a scene. If he let me go, I was just an old man pottering around in the dirt. The garden was enclosed by a 10-foot brick wall. To him, it was just a larger cage. "Don't stay out too long," he said, relaxing slightly. "It is damp." I stepped out into the cool gray afternoon. The mist was rising off the lake, wrapping the trees in a ghostly shroud. I walked slowly down the stone path, stopping every few feet to inspect a rosebush playing the part of the retiree obsessed with his flowers. I made sure to stay within the line of sight of the kitchen window for the first 5 minutes. I let him see me. I let him get bored. Then I moved. I worked my way toward the dense cluster of rhododendrons at the far north corner of the estate. This was the blind spot. When I had the security cameras upgraded 3 years ago, I had instructed the technicians to leave this specific angle slightly obscured. I told them it was to preserve the privacy of the neighbors. In reality, it was paranoia, a small nagging voice that said, "Always leave a back door." Today, that paranoia was my salvation. I pushed through the wet, heavy leaves. Behind the bushes, the brick wall had a small service gate, usually locked and rusted shut, but I kept the key. It was on a separate ring hidden in the lining of my coat. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking slightly from the cold. The mechanism was stiff, but it turned with a heavy clack. I pushed the gate open just enough to squeeze through. I stepped out onto the service road that ran behind the properties. It was empty, lined with dripping fir trees. But 50 yards down, a gray sedan was parked with its engine idling. It wasn't a luxury car. It was a nondescript domestic model, the kind that vanishes in traffic. I walked toward it. The window rolled down. A face I hadn't seen in 2 years looked out. It was a face carved from granite, weathered by years of seeing the worst of humanity. "Hello, boss," Frank said. "You look like hell." I opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. The car smelled of stale coffee and rain. It was the most comforting smell I had encountered all day. "Drive, Frank," I said. "Just around the block. They think I am pruning roses." Frank put the car in gear, and we rolled slowly down the wet asphalt. Frank was my former head of security. I had fired him when I retired, thinking I didn't need a bodyguard anymore. I had been wrong. He was the only man on my payroll who had never stolen a paperclip. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the handkerchief. I unfolded it, revealing the blue pill. "Lab analysis," I said, my voice steady. Frank glanced at it, then back at the road. He produced a small plastic evidence bag from his jacket pocket. I dropped the pill inside. "I can have results in an hour," Frank said. "But looking at it, I would guess high-dose benzodiazepines mixed with something else. Antipsychotics, maybe. Something to make you pliable. Something to make you drool." I nodded. It matched the symptoms. Then I pulled out the USB drive. "This is the kill shot, Frank. It has everything. Keylogger data, emails to the insurance company, and a video file of my wife and my son plotting to oil the stairs." Frank took the drive. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. His knuckles turned white. "They tried the stairs?" he asked, his voice dropping to a growl. "This morning," I replied. "I walked around it." "But they are desperate, Frank. The insurance policy kicks in at midnight tomorrow. They need me incompetent tonight and dead by tomorrow." Frank pulled the car over to the side of the road, sheltered by the overhanging trees. He turned to me. He opened a manila folder lying on the dashboard. "I did some digging on your doctor," he said. "Dr. Aris." I looked at the papers. Photos of Aris coming out of a casino at 3 in the morning. Bank statements showing massive withdrawals. "He is not just a bad doctor," Harrison Frank explained, pointing to a highlighted figure. "He is a drowning man. He owes $400,000 to a syndicate in Vegas. He has been stripping assets to pay the interest. But here is the kicker." Frank flipped the page. There was a photo of a poker table. 2 men sat next to each other, laughing, holding drinks. One was Dr. Aris. The other was Leo. "They play at the same underground game," Frank said. "That is how they met. Your son owes money to the same people. They aren't just lovers or partners in crime. They are co-debtors. They are doing this because if they don't pay up by the end of the month, they are going to lose their kneecaps." Or worse, I stared at the photo of my son. He looked sweaty, manic, desperate. It all made sense. The urgency, the sloppiness. They were terrified. They were trying to kill me to save themselves. "Beatrice," I asked. "She is the bank," Frank said. "She thinks she is running the show, but these 2 are using her to clear their ledgers. Once you are dead, and she gets the money, they would probably drain her dry, too." I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. I wasn't just fighting for my life. I was fighting a pack of rabid animals. "I need to go back," I said. "The guests arrive in 2 hours." Frank reached into the glove compartment. He pulled out a small black device. It looked like a flash drive, but slightly larger. "Take this," Frank said, pressing it into my palm. "It is a wireless casting node. It bypasses the smart TV's internal security. Plug it into the HDMI port on the back of the big screen in the living room. It creates a direct peer-to-peer connection with my laptop." "What does it do?" I asked, turning the cold metal over in my hand. "It gives me control," Frank said, a grim smile touching his lips. "You get them in that room. You get them comfortable. You get them to make their speech. And when you are ready, you press the button on the side. It will override whatever is on the screen. It will broadcast the video evidence, the emails, everything I have on my drive. It will play it loud and clear. I gripped the device. It was small, but it felt heavy. It was the gavel of the judge. I will be parked outside the main gate with a team, Frank added. The moment that video plays, we move in. We will secure the premises until the police arrive. You just need to survive until then. I nodded. I opened the car door. The rain had started again, a cold drizzle that soaked into my bones. Thank you, Frank, I said. He looked at me, his eyes softening. Give them hell, boss. I stepped out of the car and walked back toward the service gate. I slipped through the gap in the wall and pushed my way back through the rhododendrons. I emerged into the garden, my coat wet, my shoes muddy. I walked back up the stone path carrying a dead rose in my hand as a prop. Leo was still at the window. He watched me approach. I could see the relief on his face. He thought the old man had just been out for a confused wander in the rain. I walked into the kitchen, shivering theatrically. Too cold, I muttered, dropping the dead flower on the counter. Too cold for roses. Leo smiled, a predatory, condescending smile. Go warm up, Dad. The party is about to start. I shuffled past him, my hand in my pocket clutching the black device. You have no idea, son, I thought. The party has already started, and I just brought the fireworks. I headed toward the living room. The massive 80-inch television hung above the fireplace, a black monolith waiting to be awakened. I needed to get behind it. I needed to plug in the truth, and then I would sit back and watch their world burn. The living room had been transformed into a theater of lies. Beatrice had lit dozens of candles, casting a soft, flickering glow that was meant to feel intimate, but only served to deepen the shadows where I sat. She moved through the room like a shark in silk, adjusting a flower arrangement here, smoothing a cushion there, ensuring that the stage was perfectly set for my public execution. I was seated in my favorite wingback chair near the fireplace, the one spot in the room that offered a panoramic view of the proceedings. From here, I could see the front door, the dining area, and most importantly, the wet bar in the corner. I sat still, my hands resting on the head of my cane, playing the part of the furniture. To them, I was just another object in the room, dusty and waiting to be put into storage. The cast of characters began to assemble. First there was Arthur, the lawyer Beatrice had hired. He wasn't my corporate counsel. He was a strip mall attorney who specialized in quick estates and questionable probates. He walked in with a cheap suit and a nervous sweat, clutching a leather briefcase that I knew contained the papers to strip me of my rights. Then came Dr. Aris. He arrived early before the other guests, striding in as if he already owned the place. He winked at Beatrice when he thought I wasn't looking, a gesture so casual and intimate it made my stomach turn. And then there was Leo, my son. He was pacing near the window, checking his phone every 30 seconds. He couldn't sit still. The guilt, or perhaps the fear of the debt collectors, was vibrating off him in waves. Beatrice clapped her hands together, drawing their attention. Okay, everyone. The rest of the witnesses will be here in 20 minutes, she said, her voice bright and commanding. Let's make sure we are all on the same page. When they arrive, the narrative is compassion. We are doing this because we love him. We are doing this because he is a danger to himself. She gestured toward me as if I were a deaf mute. Arthur nodded vigorously. Absolutely. The medical report from Dr. Aris is the cornerstone. Once we establish the pattern of confusion, the signature on the transfer of power is just a formality. We will frame it as a protective measure. Doctor. Aris chuckled, pouring himself a glass of sparkling water. Don't worry, Beatrice. After the display he put on at the clinic today, calling for a dead dog, any judge would sign the order in a heartbeat. He is cooked. I listened to them discuss my demise with the casual detachment of people planning a renovation. They weren't talking about a person. They were talking about an obstacle. "Leo, honey," Beatrice said, turning to my son. "Why don't you pour your father a drink? Something to relax him. We need him calm when the guests get here. We don't want another outburst." Leo nodded. He walked over to the wet bar. I watched him. I watched him with the intensity of a sniper waiting for a target. He reached for the bottle of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, a vintage I had been saving for my 75th birthday. He poured a generous amount into a crystal goblet. Then he paused. He looked over his shoulder. Beatrice and Eris were deep in conversation with the lawyer, laughing about something. They weren't watching him. But I was. Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic bottle. It looked like eye drops. Visine. I knew this trick. I had seen it used in bars by men who wanted to knock someone out quickly. Tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in eye drops, causes a rapid drop in blood pressure, drowsiness, and in high enough doses, a coma. For a man my age with my heart condition, it could easily be fatal. Or at the very least, it would leave me slurring my words and stumbling, the perfect picture of a senile drunk. He squeezed the bottle. 1, 2, 3 long squirts into the dark red wine. The clear liquid swirled and vanished instantly into the alcohol. He put the bottle back in his pocket and swirled the glass. He took a deep breath, composing his face into a mask of filial piety. He walked over to me. The glass was in his hand. The poison was in the glass. "Here you go, Dad," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A nice glass of red, just like you like it. It will help with the nerves." I looked at the glass. I looked at the dark liquid that promised oblivion. Then I looked up at my son. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the tremor in his hand. He was terrified. He was a coward who couldn't even look his victim in the eye while he handed him the weapon. "Thank you, Leo," I said softly. My voice was steady. I reached out and took the glass. His fingers brushed mine. They were cold and clammy. "You are a good son," I added, "always looking out for my health." Leo flinched. He pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. He muttered something unintelligible and quickly turned away, retreating to the safety of the group across the room. I held the glass in my hand. I could smell the rich aroma of the grapes masking the chemical bitterness he had added. Beatrice looked over at me and smiled, raising her own glass in a mock toast. "Cheers, Harrison. To a peaceful evening." I raised the poisoned glass in return. I didn't drink. I just held it, letting the light catch the crystal. "You want peace, Beatrice," I thought. "I am about to give you a war." I glanced at the television mounted above the fireplace. The small black device Frank had given me was plugged into the back, invisible to them, waiting for my signal. I looked at the glass of wine again. I wasn't going to drink it, but I wasn't going to pour it out either. This glass was evidence. It was the final nail in the coffin I was building for them. I waited until they turned back to their conversation. Then, with a sleight of hand I had practiced 1,000 times with coins to entertain my grandchildren, years ago I reached for the glass of water, sitting on the side table next to me. In one smooth motion, I poured a small amount of the wine into the potted palm next to my chair, just enough to lower the level, making it look like I had taken a sip. Then I sat back, holding the glass, and put a dreamy, confused smile on my face. The doorbell rang. "Showtime," Beatrice announced, smoothing her dress. Arthur the lawyer stood up straight. Leo wiped his face. Dr. Aris checked his stolen watch. They moved toward the door to welcome the audience to my funeral. I stayed in my chair. I gripped the stem of the wine glass. I felt the cool weight of the remote control in my other pocket. "Let them come," I whispered to the empty air. "Let them all come and see." Beatrice opened the door, her voice ringing out with fake joy. "Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming on such short notice. Harrison is so excited to see you all." I took a deep breath. The old lion was awake, and he was hungry. The living room filled up quickly, transforming my home into a crowded theater of whispers and side glances. It was a parade of hypocrisy. These were people I had known for years. Some were business associates who had once feared my negotiation tactics. Others were charity board members who had happily cashed my checks. But tonight, they did not look at me with respect or even friendship. They looked at me with the heavy, suffocating weight of pity. Beatrice had done her groundwork well. I could hear the rumors circulating in the air like a virus. I caught fragments of conversations as people drifted by my chair, thinking I was too far gone to understand. Poor Beatrice, a woman in a blue dress, whispered to her husband, "It must be so exhausting for her. I heard he doesn't even recognize her half the time." Her husband nodded, glancing at me while sipping his scotch. "It is a tragedy. A man of his stature reduced to a shell." I sat there in my wingback chair, gripping the stem of the poisoned wineglass. I forced my posture to slump. I let my mouth hang open slightly, just enough to look vacant. I stared at the flickering candle on the coffee table, as if it were the most fascinating thing in the universe. Inside, my mind was screaming. I wanted to stand up and roar. I wanted to tell the man in the gray suit that I remembered he cheated on his taxes in '98. I wanted to tell the woman in blue that I knew her charity was a tax shelter. But I remained silent. Silence was my shield. If I spoke now, I would lose the element of surprise. Beatrice was in her element. She moved through the crowd, accepting condolences as if I were already dead. She played the role of the martyr with Oscar-worthy dedication. She stood in the center of the room, her hand resting dramatically on her chest. "It has been the hardest year of my life," she told a small circle of rapt listeners. "You try to protect their dignity, you know. You try to keep them home where they are loved." But when he started wandering into the street at night, when he started accusing the mailman of being a spy, I knew we needed help. She wiped a non-existent tear from her eye. The crowd murmured sympathetically. She was painting a portrait of a madman, and I was sitting right there, the living proof of her burden. She walked over to me, bringing the audience with her. She placed a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and cold like a shackle. "Harrison, darling," she said, her voice loud and overly enunciated, like she was speaking to a toddler. "Look who is here. It is the Millers. Do you remember the Millers?" I slowly turned my head. I looked at the Millers. I looked right through them. I gave a slow, lopsided smile and nodded at the empty space behind their heads. "Hello, Barn," I mumbled, slurring the words intentionally. Beatrice let out a sad, resigned sigh. "He is having a bad day," she whispered to them, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The medication makes him groggy, but it keeps the aggression down." Leo was playing his part too, though he lacked his mother's finesse. He hovered near me, acting the part of the strong, protective son. He refilled guests' drinks, shaking hands, accepting praise for stepping up to run the family affairs. Every time he walked past me, he checked the wine glass in my hand. He was anxious. He wanted me to drink it. He wanted me to slump over and prove to everyone that I was physically failing as well as mentally. "Here, Dad, let me fix your collar," Leo said, bending down. He adjusted my shirt, his hands trembling slightly. Up close, he smelled of sweat and fear. "Just drink the wine, Dad," he hissed in my ear so quietly that only I could hear. "It will make you feel better." I looked at him. I gave him a blank stare and patted his hand clumsily. "Good boy," I said. "Good boy." Leo grit his teeth and stood up, forcing a smile for the room. "He loves me so much," Leo told the room. "Even when he is confused, he knows family." It was sickening. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They were rewriting my history in real time, erasing the man I was, and replacing him with a caricature of senility. and the worst part was that everyone believed them. The witnesses were bought and paid for not with money, but with the currency of trust. They trusted Beatrice. They trusted the grieving son. They had no reason to suspect that beneath the expensive catering and the soft jazz music, a murder was being orchestrated. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 7 times. This was the cue. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The casual chatter died down. Arthur the lawyer stepped forward. He cleared his throat, commanding attention. He placed his briefcase on the heavy oak coffee table in front of me. The click of the latches opening sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. He pulled out a thick stack of documents. They were bound in a blue folder. I knew exactly what they were. The durable power of attorney, the transfer of the estate, the immediate activation of the conservatorship. Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur began, his voice smooth and practiced. I hate to interrupt the evening, but as you know, Harrison's condition requires certain legal safeguards. We are all here because we care about him. We want to ensure that his legacy is protected and that his medical needs are met without delay. He looked around the room, making eye contact with the key witnesses. Beatrice and Leo have made the difficult decision to formally take over the management of the Caldwell estate. Arthur continued. It is a heavy burden, but one they are willing to bear for the sake of their husband and father. We just need to finalize the signatures in the presence of witnesses to ensure everything is above board. Beatrice walked over and stood next to the lawyer. She looked down at me with an expression of tragic necessity. It is for your own good, Harrison, she said softly. So we can pay the doctors. So we can keep the house. Leo stepped up on my other side. He placed a pen in my hand. Just sign on the line, Dad, Leo said. Just like we practiced. Then you can go to sleep. The room held its breath. All eyes were on me. The old man in the chair. The invalid. The victim. I looked at the pen. It was a Mont Blanc. My Mont Blanc. They were using my own pen to sign away my life. I looked at the document. The letters were crisp and black. I, Harrison Caldwell, being of sound mind and body. The irony was palpable. The document claimed I was sound, yet the premise of the signing was that I was incompetent. I let my hand shake. I let the pen hover over the paper. I saw Arthur lean in hungry for the ink. I saw Beatrice's eyes narrow, calculating the millions that would flow into her account the moment the tip touched the page. I saw Leo holding his breath, waiting for his debts to vanish. I looked up at them. I let the vacant smile drop from my face for just a fraction of a second. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to see the spark of intelligence before the explosion. But I held it back. Not yet. I leaned forward, as if struggling to see the line. Is this for the school? I asked, my voice weak. No, Dad. Leo said, impatience bleeding into his tone. It is for us. Just sign it. I gripped the pen harder. I looked around the room at the witnesses one last time. I wanted them to remember this moment. I wanted them to remember exactly where they stood when the truth came out. I lowered the pen to the paper. But instead of signing, I slowly set the pen down on the table. I picked up the wine glass. Leo's eyes lit up. He thought I was surrendering. He thought I was choosing the oblivion of the drug over the confusion of the legalities. I held the glass up to the light. Before I sign, I said, my voice suddenly clearing, shedding the tremor, shedding the weakness. I think we should have a toast. Beatrice froze. The change in my tone was subtle, but to a conspirator it was a thunderclap. A toast? Arthur asked, confused. Yes, I said. I looked directly at Dr. Aris across the room. To health and to the truth. I didn't drink. I set the glass down next to the unsigned papers. And I think I continued, my voice gaining the command that had once silenced boardrooms. We should watch a little something on TV first. I reached into my pocket and pressed the button on the remote control. The black screen above the fireplace roared to life. The room went silent, but this time it was the silence of terror. The game was over. The hunt had begun. The crystal goblet felt heavy in my hand, weighted down not by the liquid inside, but by the intent behind it. Leo was standing so close to me, I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. He was vibrating with nervous energy, his eyes darting from my face to the glass and back again. He needed me to drink. He needed the chemical curtain to fall so he could drag my body across the finish line of his betrayal. I looked down into the dark red abyss of the wine. The liquid was still hiding its secret well. To the naked eye, it was just a vintage Cabernet. To me, it was a weapon. Beatrice stepped into the center of the room. She raised her own glass, her diamond bracelet catching the candlelight. The light fractured into tiny rainbows that danced across the walls, a stark contrast to the darkness gathering in the room. Before we signed, she announced, her voice trembling with a fabricated emotion that the guests mistook for love. I want to propose a toast to Harrison, to the man who built this family, and to the peace he so richly deserves. The guests murmured their agreement, "Hear, hear." They raised their glasses. Dr. Aris, standing by the coffee table, picked up his glass. It was identical to mine. Crystal. Heavy. Filled with the same dark red vintage. He stood there with an arrogant slouch, swirling the wine, looking at me with a smirk that said, "Checkmate, old man." I sat forward in my chair. The movement was slow, deliberate. I let my hand shake the wine, sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Leo reached out as if to steady me, but I pulled away. To peace, I rasped my voice, sounding like dry leaves being crushed. I needed to move. I needed to change the geometry of the table. Dr. Aris was standing just to my right. He had set his glass down on the edge of the low coffee table to adjust the cuff of his shirt, my shirt. I realized with a fresh spike of anger. He was wearing one of my custom-tailored shirts. The thief didn't just want my money. He wanted my skin. I leaned forward to place my glass on the table, feigning weakness. As I did, my other hand, the one resting on my knee, brushed against a small silver teaspoon sitting on a saucer channel from the earlier coffee service. I swept my hand sideways. It was a clumsy motion, the spasming jerk of a dying nervous system. Or so it seemed. The spoon flew off the saucer. It hit the edge of the table with a sharp metallic clatter and bounced onto the hardwood floor, spinning noisily under the table near Dr. Aris's feet. "Oops," I mumbled, staring down at the floor in confusion. My hands. I can't feel my hands. The reaction was immediate. Instinct is a powerful thing. When something drops, people look down. Leo looked down. Beatrice looked down. The lawyer looked down. Dr. Aris, annoyed by the interruption, bent down to retrieve the spoon, his eyes leaving the table for a split second. That was the moment. It takes less than a second to move a hand 6 inches. I didn't shake. I didn't tremble. My hand shot out with the speed of a striking cobra. I grabbed Dr. Aris's glass and slid it toward me simultaneously, sliding my poisoned glass into the exact spot where his had been. The glasses were identical. The wine levels were identical. By the time Aris straightened up, holding the silver spoon with a look of distaste, the swap was done. My hands were back in my lap, trembling once more. He placed the spoon on the table and picked up the glass that was sitting exactly where he had left it. He didn't look at the wine. Why would he? He was the predator. He didn't fear the trap. "Thank you, doctor," I said, looking him dead in the eye. He sneered at me, a quick flash of teeth. "Don't mention it, Harrison. Just try to hold on to your drink." Beatrice raised her glass higher. "To Harrison," she repeated, looking at me with eyes that said goodbye. "To Harrison," the room echoed. I lifted the glass, Dr. Aris's glass, to my lips. I watched Leo. He was holding his breath. He was practically praying for me to swallow. I tipped my head back. I drank. The wine hit my tongue. It was rich oaky with notes of blackberry and leather. It was pure. It tasted like life. It tasted like justice. I swallowed a large mouthful, then lowered the glass, letting out a satisfied sigh. Leo exhaled, his shoulders slumping in relief. He thought he had won. He thought the drug was now coursing through my veins, ticking down the seconds, until my heart slowed and my mind dissolved. I watched Dr. Eris. He took a long, indulgent sip of his wine. He swirled it in his mouth, savoring the vintage, completely unaware that he was marinating his tongue in a massive dose of tetrahydrozoline. He swallowed. Then he took another sip, and another. He was thirsty. Greed is a thirsty business. I sat back in my chair, crossing my legs. I felt a calm settle over me. The hard part was done. Now I just had to wait for the chemistry to do its work. "So Arthur," I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong, cutting through the murmurs of the room. "You were saying something about safety, about protecting my assets." Arthur blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in my tone. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell. The conservatorship is designed to—" I waved my hand, dismissing him. "It is funny. I was just thinking about safety. You know we lock our doors to keep thieves out. But what do you do when the thieves have the keys? What do you do when the thieves are sleeping in your bed?" Beatrice froze. She lowered her glass. "What are you talking about, Harrison? You are confused." "Am I?" I asked. I turned my gaze to Dr. Eris. The doctor was frowning. He reached up and loosened his tie. He blinked rapidly, shaking his head as if trying to clear water from his ears. The drug was hitting him fast. That was the problem with eye drops. When ingested, they hit the bloodstream like a freight train. "Are you all right, doctor?" I asked, my voice dripping with mock concern. "You look a little flushed." Eris opened his mouth to speak, but his words came out thick and slurred. I am fine. It is just hot in here." He stumbled slightly, grabbing the edge of the coffee table for support. The glass in his hand tilted, spilling red wine onto the Persian rug. Leo stepped forward. "Doc, you okay?" Aris looked at Leo. His eyes were wide, the pupils pinned. Confusion washed over his face, followed by a wave of pure panic. He couldn't focus. His blood pressure was plummeting. His heart was struggling to pump blood to his brain. I don't feel—" He didn't finish the sentence. His knees buckled. It wasn't a slow slump. It was a crash. He went down hard, hitting the floor with a thud that shook the room. The wine glass shattered in his hand, sending shards of crystal skittering across the floor like diamonds. "Oh my God!" Beatrice screamed. She dropped her own glass and rushed to him. The guests gasped, backing away, pressing themselves against the walls. Aris was on his back. His body arched in a sudden violent spasm. His hands clawed at his throat as if he were choking on invisible smoke. White foam tinged with pink from the wine began to bubble at the corners of his mouth. His eyes rolled back into his head, showing only the whites. "Call 911, someone shouted. Leo stood frozen, staring at the writhing man on the floor. He knew. I saw the realization hit him like a physical blow. He looked from Aris to the shattered glass, and then slowly, terrifyingly, he looked at me. I was sitting calmly in my chair, holding my glass of wine. I swirled the liquid gently. "Don't touch him," I commanded. My voice was a whip crack in the chaos. Beatrice looked up, her face a mask of horror and mascara. "What did you do?" she shrieked. "You crazy old man, what did you do to him?" "I didn't do anything." "Beatrice," I said coldly, "I just watched him drink from the glass your son poured." The room went deathly silent save for the wet, gurgling sounds coming from Dr. Eris. I stood up. I didn't need the cane. I walked over to where my wife was kneeling beside her lover. I towered over them. You wanted a medical emergency, I said, looking down at the chaos. You wanted a tragedy to secure your fortune. Well, congratulations. You got one. But I think you got the wrong victim. Aris convulsed again, his heels drumming a frantic rhythm on the floor. He is overdosing, I said to the room at large. Tetrahydrozoline poisoning. It causes seizures, respiratory failure, and coma. It acts very quickly when mixed with alcohol. How do you know that Arthur the lawyer whispered, his face pale as a sheet? Because I said, pointing a finger at Leo, who was backing away toward the door. That is what my son put in my drink. The doctor just got to it first. Leo turned to run. Stop, I yelled. I pulled the remote control from my pocket. Nobody leaves. I pressed the button. The huge television screen above the fireplace flashed white, then resolved into a crystal-clear image. It was a video. The timestamp was from yesterday. It showed Beatrice and Aris in this very room. On the screen, Aris was laughing. He was holding a small bottle of eye drops. Just a few drops, the errors on the screen said. He will be out cold. He won't know what he is signing. And if his heart stops, well, he is 72. Who is going to ask questions? The audio boomed through the surround sound speakers, echoing off the high ceilings. In the center of the room, the real Aris stopped moving, slipping into unconsciousness. Beside him, Beatrice stared at the screen, watching her own conspiracy played back in high definition. I looked at the guests. Their mouths hung open. The pity in their eyes was gone, replaced by shock and revulsion. I told you, I said, straightening my cuffs. We were going to watch a little TV. I looked at Leo. He was trapped against the door, shaking. Sit down, son, I said. The movie is just starting. The chaos in the living room was a symphony of panic. Dr. Aris was still on the floor, his body twitching in the final throes of the chemical storm raging in his blood. His face had turned a sickly shade of gray foam, bubbling at his lips like a rabid animal. Leo was the first to break the paralysis. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers slick with sweat, his face pale with terror. I have to call 911, Leo shouted, his voice cracking. He is dying. We need an ambulance. He started to dial, his thumb hovering over the screen. But Beatrice, driven by a survival instinct sharper than a knife, lunged at him. She grabbed his wrist, digging her nails into his skin. No, she hissed, her eyes wild with fear. You cannot call them. Leo stared at her, confused and horrified. Mom, look at him. He is choking. If you call the paramedics, Beatrice whispered, her voice a desperate rasp, they will run a toxicology screen. They will find the drugs, Leo. They will find the tetrahydrozoline. Do you want to go to prison for attempted murder? Leo froze. The reality of her words hit him. Saving Aris meant condemning themselves. They were trapped in a paradox of their own making. They had to let him suffer to save their own skins. I watched them from my position by the fireplace. I watched the moral collapse of my family. They were willing to let a man die on my Persian rug rather than face the consequences of their greed. It was the final confirmation I needed. There was no redemption here. There was only rot. I stood up. I didn't push myself up with the cane. I didn't groan. I rose with the fluid power of a man 20 years younger. The fog of the old man was gone. In his place stood Harrison Caldwell, the man who had crushed strikes and outmaneuvered billionaires. My voice, when I spoke, was not the whisper of an invalid. It was a baritone rumble that cut through the hysteria like a foghorn. Put the phone down, Leo. The room went silent. Beatrice spun around, her eyes wide. Leo looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost. I will make the call, I said, stepping forward. I walked past the stunned guests, past the lawyer who was clutching his briefcase like a life preserver. I stood in the center of the room, commanding the space. But I am not calling an ambulance, I continued, my eyes locking onto Beatrice. And I am not calling the police. Not yet. First, we are going to watch the feature presentation. Beatrice took a step back. Harrison, you are not making sense. You are having an episode. Stop it, Beatrice, I said, my voice cold and hard. Drop the act. The audience is bored, and they deserve to see what really happened to their ticket price. I raised the remote control. I didn't look at the TV. I looked at her. I pressed the button. The massive 80-inch screen above the fireplace flickered. The black void vanished, replaced by a high-definition nightmare. The first image was grainy but clear. It was the view from the hidden camera in the stairwell, time-stamped 6:00 a.m. this morning. On the screen, Leo was kneeling on the stairs. He was holding a bottle of industrial lubricant. He was carefully painting the wooden tread of the third step, his tongue sticking out in concentration. He looked like a child doing an art project, except the medium was murder. The guests gasped. A woman in the back covered her mouth with her hand. That is, Leo, someone whispered. The video cut. New scene. The master bedroom. Yesterday afternoon. Beatrice was on the bed. Dr. Aris was beside her. They were half-dressed, tangled in the sheets. But it wasn't the affair that shocked the room. It was the conversation. The insurance kicks in at midnight, Beatrice said on the screen, her voice clear and crisp through the surround sound speakers. $5 million, Aris. We just need him to take a tumble. He is frail. A broken hip pneumonia, it happens all the time. Aris laughed on screen, kissing her neck. Or we just give him a little cocktail. I have some eye drops that will stop a heart in 10 minutes if the dose is right. We can say it was a stroke. In the living room, the real Dr. Aris groaned on the floor, a living testament to his own prescription. Beatrice stood frozen. She wasn't breathing. She was staring at her own image, watching herself plot the death of her husband. Her face drained of all color, leaving her looking like a wax statue. The video cut again. The finale. My office. This morning. Leo was sitting at my desk. He had a light box and a tracer. He was copying my signature onto a bank transfer authorization. I will drain the operating account first, Leo muttered to himself on the video. Then I will sell the warehouse in Tacoma. The old man won't know a thing until the checks bounce. I pressed the pause button. The image of Leo, greedy and pathetic, froze on the screen, looming over the room like a gargoyle. I lowered the remote. I looked at the crowd. They were paralyzed. The Millers were clinging to each other. The lawyer Arthur was backing away toward the door, his eyes wide with terror. He knew his license was burning to ash in real time. I turned to Leo. He was shaking so hard the wine glass in his hand was vibrating. He looked at the screen, then at me. Dad, he whimpered. It is a deep fake. It is AI. I didn't do that. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Don't insult my intelligence, Leo, and don't insult theirs. I pointed to the floor where Aris lay. You want proof. Look at your partner. He is dying of the very poison you prepared for me. You tried to kill me tonight in front of everyone. You just picked the wrong glass. Leo's hand went limp. The glass of wine he had been holding, the one he had poured for himself to celebrate my demise, slipped from his fingers. It hit the hardwood floor. Smash. Red wine exploded outward, splattering against his expensive trousers, looking for all the world like arterial spray. Beatrice collapsed. She didn't faint. She just gave up. Her legs gave way, and she sank to her knees, burying her face in her hands. A guttural sound ripped from her throat, a mix of a sob and a scream. It wasn't a scream of remorse. It was the scream of a gambler who had bet everything on black, and the ball had landed on zero. I looked at the guests. Get out, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. They didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled for the door, pushing past each other, desperate to escape the stench of the crime. I looked at Arthur. "You stay," I said. The lawyer froze his hand on the doorknob. "You are going to witness one last thing," Arthur I said, walking toward the phone. "You are going to witness a citizen's arrest." I picked up the landline. I dialed 3 numbers. 911. The operator answered. "Emergency, which service? Police and ambulance," I said, my eyes never leaving my wife and son. "I have a poisoning victim, and I have 2 intruders in my home." "Intruders, sir?" "Yes," I said. "They look like family, but they are just thieves. Please hurry." I hung up the phone. I sat back down in my wingback chair. I crossed my legs. I watched them. Beatrice on her knees, Leo shaking in a puddle of wine, Aris twitching on the rug. The show was over. The credits were rolling, and I was the only one left in the theater. The silence in the room was shattered by a scream that didn't sound human. It was the sound of a trapped animal realizing the cage door was welded shut. Leo was no longer my son. He was no longer the arrogant heir in the Italian suit. He was a cornered rat. He looked at the television screen where his guilt was playing on a loop, then he looked at me, the old man sitting calmly in the wingback chair. "You ruined everything," Leo roared. His face was purple veins bulging in his neck. He didn't run for the door. He didn't run for his mother. In his panic, his brain chose violence. He lunged. He came at me with his hands curled into claws, intending to do what the poison had failed to do. He wanted to silence the witness. He wanted to smash the remote control, the screen, and my skull. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't even lift my cane. I just watched him come. I watched the distance close between us. 10 feet. 5 feet. I saw the madness in his eyes. It was a pity, really. He had always been weak, but I never thought he was stupid enough to attack a man who had anticipated his every move for the last 24 hours. Just as Leo reached the coffee table ready to leap over it, the French doors behind me exploded inward. Glass shattered inward, raining down on the hardwood. But it wasn't the wind. Frank moved with the speed of a linebacker. He didn't shout. He didn't announce himself. He simply intercepted the target. He hit Leo mid-air, a solid wall of muscle colliding with a frantic bag of bones. The impact was sickeningly loud. They crashed onto the Persian rug, skidding past Dr. Aris's twitching body. Leo scrambled, trying to punch, trying to bite, screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush. But Frank was a professional. He had spent 20 years taking down union busters and port thieves. He twisted Leo's arm behind his back with a practiced efficiency that elicited a sharp crack and a high-pitched yelp of pain. 2 other men dressed in dark tactical gear swarmed into the room from the kitchen entrance. They didn't speak. They moved like shadows. One secured Leo's legs. The other stood over Beatrice, not touching her, but effectively walling her off from any escape. "Get off me!" Leo screamed, his face pressed into the wool rug. "You can't do this. I am Leo Caldwell." "You are a disappointment," Frank said, his voice calm as he clicked a pair of heavy zip ties around Leo's wrists. "That is what you are." I finally stood up. I brushed a speck of dust from my lapel. I walked over to where my son lay, pinned to the floor. I looked down at him. He looked up at me, breathless tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot and the wine. "Dad, please," he sobbed, the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had arrived. "Tell them to let me go. I didn't mean it. It was her idea. She made me do it." He pointed his chin toward his mother. Even at the end, he was a coward. He would sell out his accomplice to save his own skin for 5 more minutes. I shook my head slowly. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a cold, hollow absence where my love for him used to be. "You chose your side, Leo," I said softly. "You bet against the house, and the house always wins." I stepped over him. I walked toward Beatrice. She hadn't moved. She was still on her knees, staring at the floor, her hands trembling in her lap. She looked small. The grandeur of the hostess, the devoted wife, the grieving widow. It had all evaporated. All that was left was a middle-aged woman who had reached for the sun and burned her hands. I stopped in front of her. I could smell her perfume. It was the same scent she had worn on our wedding day. It was the same scent she had worn while sleeping with the doctor. It made me sick. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed with smeared mascara. "Harrison," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We can fix this. I can explain. It was just a misunderstanding." I was confused. I leaned down. I got close to her, invading her personal space until my face was inches from hers. I wanted her to see the clarity in my eyes. I wanted her to see that there was no dementia, no confusion, only a razor-sharp memory of every betrayal. "Save it for the jury." "Beatrice," I whispered. She flinched, but I didn't pull back. "You played the role of the devoted wife very well." I continued, my voice a low rumble that only she could hear. "You thought you were smart. You thought you were dealing with a doddering old fool who spent his days watching golf and napping. But you forgot who I was before I was your husband." I gestured slightly with my head toward the men securing the room. "You forgot the audience you were performing for Beatrice? You thought you were acting for the country club set. You forgot that I built my fortune in the shipping yards of the 80s. I was negotiating with gangsters and union bosses before you were even born. I have stared down men who would skin you alive for a nickel, and I made them thank me for the privilege." Her lip quivered. She tried to look away, but I held her gaze. "Did you really think a few teary eyes and a forged doctor's note would be enough to take me down?" I asked. "I have been playing three-dimensional chess while you were playing checkers. I knew about the bank accounts before you spent the first dollar. I knew about the insurance policy before the ink was dry. I knew about the stairs before I even put my shoes on this morning." I stood up straight, towering over her. "You didn't marry a man, Beatrice. You married a vault, and you just tried to crack it with a plastic hammer." Behind me, a low, guttural moan echoed through the room. It was Dr. Aris. He was curled in a fetal position. His expensive suit ruined his body, racked with tremors. His eyes were open, darting frantically around the room, terrified and uncomprehending. He couldn't speak. His tongue was swollen, lolling out of his mouth. Beatrice looked at him, then back at me with horror. Is he going to die?" she asked. I looked at the man who had worn my watch and slept in my bed. I looked at the man who had prescribed my oblivion. I walked over to him and nudged his leg with the toe of my shoe. "No," I said matter-of-factly. "He isn't going to die." I turned back to Beatrice. "I know the dosage, Beatrice. I know exactly how much tetrahydrozoline it takes to kill a man, and exactly how much it takes to make him wish he was dead." I gave him the latter. He is paralyzed. His heart rate is dropping to about 40 beats per minute. He feels like he is drowning in his own body. It is terrifying, painful, and completely incapacitating. I paused, letting the words sink in. "It is roughly the same feeling I had every time I took those blue pills you forced down my throat. Helplessness. Trapped in a body that won't obey. I thought it was only fair that he experienced the side effects of his own medicine." Aris let out another moan, a sound of pure misery. "He will recover," I added, "in about 24 hours, just in time to be arraigned for conspiracy to commit murder." Beatrice covered her face with her hands and began to sob. It was a broken, defeated sound. Suddenly the room was washed in a rhythmic blue light. It pulsed through the front windows, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. Then came the sound, the wail of sirens. Not one, but many. They were getting louder, cutting through the rainy night. getting closer and closer. I walked to the window and pulled back the heavy velvet curtain. The driveway was filling with police cruisers. Their lights reflected off the wet pavement, turning the scene into a chaotic light show. Frank walked up beside me, dusting off his hands. "Police are at the gate, Harrison," he said quietly. "They have the digital packet I sent over. They know everything." I nodded. I looked at the reflection of the room in the glass. I saw my son bound on the floor. I saw my wife broken on her knees. I saw the doctor twitching in his own filth. It wasn't a happy ending. There is no happiness in seeing your life's work implode. But there was satisfaction. The deep, primal satisfaction of survival. "Let them in, Frank," I said. I turned back to the room one last time. Leo looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Dad, please. I am scared." I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I felt peace. "You should be, son," I said. "You finally have a reason to be." I walked toward the front door to open it for the authorities. I walked with my head high, my steps sure. The cane was in my hand, but I wasn't leaning on it. I was carrying it like a scepter. The king was still on the throne, and the usurpers were in chains. The red and blue lights of the police cruisers danced across the wet driveway, illuminating the rain that had started to fall again. It felt like a cleansing rain washing away the toxicity that had seeped into the very mortar of my home. I stood on the porch, my coat pulled tight against the wind, watching the end of an empire of lies. The officers brought them out one by one. Leo came first. He was no longer the arrogant young man who had laughed at my expense. He was weeping openly, his head hanging low, his wrists bound tightly behind his back. As he passed me, he didn't look up. He couldn't. The shame was too heavy, or perhaps he was just realizing that the inheritance he had killed for was now going to be used to pay for his legal defense. Then came the paramedics, wheeling Dr. Aris out on a stretcher. He was conscious now, but barely. His eyes were wide and terrified, darting around wildly as the reality of his paralysis set in. He locked eyes with me for a brief second. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him with the indifference of a man watching a bug being swept away by a broom. Finally, they brought Beatrice. She was struggling. She was trying to maintain some semblance of dignity, but it was failing. Her hair was disheveled, her expensive dress stained with the wine she had intended for my grave. When she saw me standing there safe and untouchable, something broke inside her. "Harrison," she screamed, pulling against the officer's grip. "Harrison, please, you can't let them take me. I am your wife. We can talk about this. I can explain everything." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had shared my bed for 10 years. I looked at the woman who had kissed my forehead this morning and sent me off to D. I remember thinking about how much I used to love her. I remember how her smile used to light up the room. But looking at her now, all I saw was a stranger who had tried to murder me for a check. She reached out a hand toward me, her fingers grasping at the air. "Harrison, please don't turn your back on me." I didn't say a word. I simply turned around. I walked back into my house and closed the heavy oak door. The sound of the latch clicking shut was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a book closing, the sound of a final period at the end of a long, painful sentence. The next few hours were a blur of fluorescent lights and bitter coffee at the precinct. I sat in an interrogation room not as a suspect, but as the architect of my own justice. I laid it all out on the metal table. The USB drive with the keylogger data, the video files from the hidden cameras, the audio recordings of their conspiracy. The detective in charge was a young man, sharp and serious. He watched the video of Leo oiling the stairs. He listened to the recording of Beatrice discussing the insurance payout. He looked at me with a mixture of shock and respect. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, closing the file, "this is the most airtight case I have ever seen. They won't see daylight for 20 years. I signed the statement with a steady hand. My signature was bold, sweeping the signature of a man who was in full command of his faculties. When I walked out of the station, the sun was just beginning to crest over the horizon. It was a pale, watery dawn, but to me, it looked like the most beautiful sunrise in history. My private lawyer, the real one, not the clown Beatrice had hired, was waiting for me in his car. We drove to a diner near the waterfront. I ordered eggs, bacon, and black coffee. It was the first meal I had eaten in months that I didn't have to inspect for poison. "So it is done?" my lawyer asked, stirring his tea. "It is done," I replied, cutting into my eggs. "They are in custody. The evidence is irrefutable." He nodded, pulling a document from his briefcase. "And the house," I smiled. That was the final twist of the knife, the secret I had kept even from Frank until the very end. Beatrice and Leo had fought so hard for that house. They had risked life in prison for the mansion on the lake. They didn't know that the mansion was already gone. "I sold it 30 days ago," I said, savoring the words. "The deed transfer is dated last month. I am technically renting it back from the new owners until the end of the week." My lawyer chuckled, shaking his head. "And the proceeds?" I took a sip of coffee. The warmth spread through my chest. "The proceeds, along with 80% of my liquid assets, have been transferred to the Veterans Support Fund," I said. "Beatrice wanted $5 million. She killed for it. Now that money is going to build housing for men and women who actually understand the meaning of loyalty." "And you, Harrison, what about you?" I looked out the window at the waking city. "I have enough," I said. "I kept enough to live comfortably, to travel, to maybe learn how to play the piano. I don't need millions to be happy. I just need to be safe." The final scene of this tragedy didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened the next morning on the first tee of the most exclusive golf course in Seattle. The air was crisp and smelled of freshly cut grass. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. I stood there looking down the fairway. My bag was next to me, polished and clean. My shoes were tied tight. I teed up the ball. It was a small white sphere, pristine and unmarked. I took a practice swing. My body felt light. For months I had been carrying the weight of suspicion, the heavy cloak of fear. I had been walking on eggshells in my own home, sleeping with one eye open, wondering if the person I loved was going to put a pillow over my face. But now the weight was gone. The fear was gone. I addressed the ball. I gripped the club, feeling the leather against my palms. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, clean air of freedom. I swung. It was a fluid, powerful motion. The club head connected with the ball with a sharp, explosive crack that echoed across the quiet course. I watched the ball fly. It soared high into the blue sky, a tiny white comet arcing toward the green. It flew straight and true, unburdened by gravity, unburdened by the past. I stood there holding my follow-through, watching it until it landed softly on the fairway 200 yards away. They wanted my assets. They wanted the numbers in my bank account. They were willing to erase a human life for a ledger entry. They are sitting in a cold cell right now, realizing that they traded their freedom for a ghost. I wanted a family. I spent my whole life thinking that family was the people who sat at your dinner table, the people who shared your last name. I thought I had to buy their love, earn their respect, tolerate their abuse because we shared blood. I was wrong. I looked over at the golf cart. Frank was sitting there cleaning his sunglasses. He wasn't my blood. He was my employee. But he had risked everything to save me. He had stood by me when my own son tried to bury me. I realized then that family isn't about DNA. It isn't about who you are related to. It is about loyalty. It is about who stays when the ship is sinking. It is about who stands between you and the darkness. I walked toward the cart, my cane left forgotten in the bag. I am 72 years old. I have lost my wife. I have lost my son. I have lost the house I built. But as I walked down that fairway, with the sun on my face and the wind in my hair, I realized something else. I have never been richer. And today, for the first time in a long time, I am free. This story is a brutal reminder that sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones capable of hurting us the deepest. We are taught that family is everything, that we should forgive anything for the sake of blood. But that is a dangerous lie. Trust your instincts. If you feel unsafe, if you feel used, if you feel like something is wrong, do not ignore it. Just because the person hurting you is a spouse or a child, you have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to draw boundaries. And you have the right to cut ties with anyone who threatens your peace, no matter who they are. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to stand up for yourself against the people you loved, please hit that like button. It helps more people find this message. And if you are new here, subscribe to the channel. I have many more stories to tell, stories about survival, justice, and the strength of the human spirit. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between loyalty and your own safety? I read every single one. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay safe and watch your back.